I used to believe love was a ledger, something you could balance with enough good behavior and perfect grades. If I woke before everyone else to boil the kettle, if I wiped crumbs from the counter until my wrists ached, if I brought home certificates like small flags of surrender, then surely the numbers would add up and my parents would finally see me. But most nights, our kitchen table erased me. My mother ladled soup, my father sliced bread with the grim precision of a metronome, and my brother talked, always my brother. His soccer practice, his coach's praise, the minor miracle of his existence repeated in different tones. Their laughter warmed the room like steam curling from the pot. I was there, of course, I passed the salt, I refilled the water, I chewed, but I might as well have been the fourth chair. Sometimes I tried to speak. We had a literature contest today, I'd begin, careful, soft. But my mother's attention would tilt back toward my brother, a plant bending to the brightest window. "You'll be scouted next season," she'd say to him, eyes bright. My father would nod, a rare smile loosening his jaw. And my sentence, patient and small, would wither half-formed in my mouth. I learned practical ways to stay useful. I took my brother's turn at the grocery store. I folded laundry with crisp corners. I memorized discounts, bus times, my father's moods, my mother's sighs. I learned what to say to keep the peace and what not to say to keep it from shattering. When you grow up in a house that runs on selective hearing, you become an expert in silence. The guidance counselor at school told me I was driven. Teachers praised my essays, their faces lighting up like open windows. They said my sentences carried weight. I copied those words into the back of my notebook, weight, driven, like charms I hoped would work at home. I'd leave the notebook casually near the fruit bowl, imagining a future in which my parents flipped it open and found me. They never did. If you asked my mother about me, she would say I was good. Good at chores, good at staying out of trouble, good at not being dramatic. Good, like a well-behaved dog. If you asked my father, he would shrug, she helps. I wanted to ask them both what it would take to be loved instead of merely useful, but I already knew the answer. Whatever it wasn't me. So I practiced vanishing. I slipped into doorways when voices rose. I swallowed questions. I trained my face into the calm of a lake before the stone hits. At night, I lay awake rehearsing a word I almost believed, enough. If I said it enough times, maybe it would be true. Tomorrow, I told myself. Tomorrow they'll see me. Tomorrow kept not arriving. I built myself out of their expectations, brick by brick, until I couldn't tell where they ended and I began. If they wanted quiet, I gave them silence. If they wanted obedience, I erased my opinions. If they wanted proof of usefulness, I produced spotless rooms and polished grades. At school, my reputation gleamed. "She's such a responsible girl," teachers said, their voices carrying a pride I never heard at home. I stacked their praise carefully in my chest, like coins in a jar, hoping one day I could pour them out onto the kitchen table and finally buy my parents' approval. But approval was always conditional. My mother had a talent for turning praise into a blade. "Yes, your grades are fine," she'd say, "but they're only words on paper. Your brother's strength is real." Or, "Of course you help around the house, but that's just what a daughter should do." Each sentence chipped at me until my accomplishments were dust. I thought maybe if I was softer, smaller, easier to handle, they would finally relax into love. So I carried more, asked less, smiled politely when my brother was held high above me like a banner. When relatives came to visit, I poured tea and stayed quiet in the corner, listening as my mother listed my brother's triumphs. Sometimes they asked about me, and she would shrug, "She's fine. Nothing special. Nothing special." The words clung to me like smoke. Still, I tried harder. I kept journals full of plans, university applications, competitions, languages I wanted to learn. At night, I whispered bargains into the dark. "Tomorrow I'll do more. Tomorrow I'll be better. Tomorrow they'll finally see me." The tomorrows piled up, endless, identical, each one swallowed by the same silence. What I didn't understand then was that love given conditionally isn't love at all. It's control dressed up as care. But when you're a child, you don't have the language for manipulation. You only have hunger, the gnawing ache to be seen, to be chosen, to be enough. And so I kept chasing. I became the good daughter, the perfect ghost. I burned myself down to a dim light and held it out to them, whispering, "Please, notice this. Please, notice me." They never did. Turning 18 should have meant something. Adulthood. A doorway. At least a candle lit in my name. The night before, I baked myself a cake. Chocolate, because it was the only flavor that felt like mine. I frosted it with shaky hands, imagining the scene, my parents smiling, my brother clapping me on the back, the word congratulations hovering in the air like a blessing. The morning came, and with it, the same kitchen routine. My brother was already at the table, wrist glittering with a brand new watch. "It's just a little gift," my mother said, beaming at him. My father grunted approval, pride brightening his eyes in that rare, molten way I'd always wanted turned on me. No one mentioned my birthday. Not my mother, who remembered every detail of my brother's life down to his shoe size. Not my father, who prided himself on being the head of the family. Not even my brother, who had shared the calendar with me all our lives. I set the cake on the counter anyway, cutting a thin slice for myself. My father glanced at it and frowned. "Why are you eating sweets so early in the day?" he asked, voice flat, already turning back to my brother's endless chatter. The fork trembled in my hand. I chewed the cake like glass, each swallow a wound. All I wanted was for one of them to notice. Just one word, "Happy birthday." But the air around me stayed heavy with their laughter, their plans, their complete absence of me. That evening, I carried what was left of the cake to my room. I sat cross-legged on the bed, candle burning crooked in the center, flame flickering like it wasn't sure it belonged either. I whispered the words to myself, "Happy birthday." They sounded strange, fragile, as if spoken in a language my house didn't recognize. That night I learned something cruel and sharp. In my family, milestones weren't measured by my existence. I wasn't the daughter at the center of celebrations. I was the shadow at the edge of someone else's joy. And once you understand that, you stop waiting for the party. After that birthday, something inside me went quiet, not the obedient quiet I had practiced all my life, but a hollow quiet. The kind that comes when even hope has grown tired. I stopped expecting. I stopped rehearsing imaginary conversations where my parents finally said they were proud of me. I stopped bringing my achievements into the kitchen like offerings to gods who never granted me a place at their table. Instead, I perfected the art of disappearing. I moved through the house like smoke, leaving no trace. Chores were done before anyone could notice. My schoolwork was finished in silence, tucked away so it wouldn't seem like I was asking for recognition. If my father raised his voice, I slipped into another room before it reached me. If my mother sighed, I anticipated what she needed before she spoke. The less I needed, the less I could be disappointed. Or at least, that's what I told myself. But even ghosts have hearts. At night, when the walls pressed too close, I buried my face into the pillow and let the tears fall silently. Crying was dangerous in that house. It exposed need, and need was weakness. So I wept into fabric, smothering the sound, punishing myself for the salt that betrayed me. I wondered, sometimes, if there was something wrong with me at the root. Maybe I had been born missing a piece that made people lovable. Maybe my parents had sensed it from the beginning, and this was why their eyes skimmed over me like I was scenery. The cruelest part was that, outside those walls, people did see me. Teachers admired my essays. Friends said I was loyal, that I listened, that I mattered. But the moment I stepped through the front door, all that worth dissolved. What is the value of being seen by the world, when the people who raised you look right through you? So I folded myself smaller, quieter, thinner, until my reflection in the mirror looked like a stranger, shoulders hunched, eyes dulled, smile practiced but unconvincing. I told myself it was safer this way. Safer to erase myself than to keep waiting for love that would never arrive. But deep down, I carried a truth I couldn't yet admit: disappearing was not safety. It was slow death. The first real crack came when I dared to want something for myself. I had spent months buried in applications, essays, and late-night study sessions, chasing a scholarship to a university in another city. When the acceptance letter arrived, the words blurred with my tears. Finally, I had proof that I wasn't just a ghost. Someone outside these walls thought I was worth investing in. I rehearsed how I would tell them. I imagined my mother's eyes widening, my father's voice softening, even my brother offering a grudging congratulations. For one fragile evening, I allowed myself to believe this could be the moment they finally saw me. At dinner, I placed the letter on the table. My hands shook, but my voice was steady. I got in. Full scholarship. I'll be moving in September. The silence was heavy, but not the odd kind I had dreamed of. My mother's face tightened like fabric pulled too hard. Another city? Who will help me here? With the house, with your father? You think you can just run off? My father didn't even look at the letter. His voice was colder than I had ever heard it. You're a girl. What do you need so much education for? Stay here. Find a job nearby. Don't think you're better than this family. It was as if the air had been punched out of me. The very people who taught me to work hard, to obey, to achieve, were now punishing me for doing exactly that. Their love, if it had ever been love, came with a leash. I was free only as long as my freedom served them. That night, I lay awake clutching the acceptance letter to my chest. The paper felt too fragile to carry the weight of everything I was about to lose. For years, I had told myself that if I was good enough, they would love me. But what if the truth was worse? What if their love was never real to begin with, only a performance I kept failing to earn? I stared at the ceiling until dawn, whispering the question I didn't dare say aloud: if my own family cannot love me, who in the world ever will? The letter crumpled in my fist, but I couldn't let go. It was the only proof that somewhere, beyond these walls, a different life might exist. After the fight about the university, something shifted in me. Outwardly, I stayed the same, dutiful, quiet, efficient. But inside, the ground had started to split. I began to notice things I had once ignored. How my parents praised my brother for simply breathing, while my sacrifices went unnoticed. How my mother used the word family as a chain: family means you stay, you obey, you don't shame us. How my father's approval dangled always just out of reach, like a carrot tied to a stick I was never meant to catch. The worst was overhearing my mother on the phone one afternoon. Her voice was warm, almost glowing, as she told a relative about my brother's soccer games. Pride dripped from every syllable. Then came the inevitable question about me. She's fine, my mother said quickly, flatly. Nothing special. Nothing special. The words wrapped around my ribs like barbed wire. That night, I stood in front of the mirror, studying myself. Was she right? Was I truly nothing? I touched my face, my hands, the curve of my shoulders. I looked ordinary, maybe even plain, but surely not invisible. And yet in this house, I might as well have been air. I realized then that it wasn't a matter of trying harder. It wasn't that I hadn't earned enough gold stars. It was that they had already decided who I was, the helper, the filler, the background character in my brother's story. And once you see a crack in the illusion, you can never unsee it. I started to test the boundaries, in small ways at first. Holding eye contact longer than usual when my father dismissed me. Pausing before jumping up to fetch something my mother wanted. Not apologizing for every breath that seemed to inconvenience them. Each act was tiny, but it felt like rebellion. Like lighting a match in a room that had always been dark. It terrified me. It thrilled me. It made me wonder what else lay beyond the narrow walls of this family's love. For the first time, the thought whispered through me, dangerous and intoxicating: maybe I don't need their love at all. The breaking point didn't arrive in some grand explosion. It came on an ordinary afternoon, in the laundry room, with a basket of shirts between me and my mother. I had folded them the way I always did, neat, careful, precise. But she yanked one from the pile, shook it out, and snapped, "You can't even do this properly. What use are you to anyone?" For a moment, her words didn't land. They hovered in the air, cruel but familiar, just another arrow in a lifetime of small stabs. But then something inside me shifted. A crack, widening. What use was I? I thought of the years of dishes scrubbed until my hands were raw, the nights bent over homework until my vision blurred, the birthdays I had celebrated alone. I thought of the silence I had carried like a stone in my chest, the apologies I had swallowed before they could form. And suddenly, I understood, no matter what I did, no matter how much of myself I sacrificed, they would always find me lacking. I dropped the shirt back into the basket. My hands were trembling, but not from fear, from the strange surge of defiance rising in my blood. For the first time, I didn't apologize. I didn't rush to fix it. I turned and walked out of the room. My mother's voice followed me down the hall, sharp with disbelief. "Don't you walk away from me." But I kept moving, heart pounding like I had broken a sacred law. In my room, I stood in front of the mirror. The girl staring back at me looked the same eyes, same tired shoulders, but something in her gaze was different. Fiercer. Alive. "You are not useless," I whispered, my voice shaking. "You are not invisible. You are not theirs to break." The words felt foreign at first, like trying on a dress that didn't belong to me. But the longer I looked into my own eyes, the more the words began to fit. It was terrifying to realize I didn't believe their version of me anymore. Terrifying, and exhilarating. Because if they were wrong about me, then maybe, just maybe, I had been wrong about them too. Maybe I didn't need to keep begging at a door that was never going to open. Once the first crack appeared, the whole house seemed different. It was as if I'd been living behind glass, and now the glass had shattered, letting in air I hadn't known I was starving for. I began to spend less time at home. I stayed late at the library, pretending I had more assignments than I really did. I lingered with classmates after school, walking slower, laughing louder, stretching every minute before I had to step back into that suffocating house. And then I started working in secret. A friend told me about a cafe that needed help on weekends. I took the job, tucked the pay into an envelope under my mattress, and with every shift I felt something growing inside me. Independence. Proof that I could build a life without their approval. When my father accused me of being too independent, I no longer flinched. His voice slid over me like rain on glass. When my mother compared me to my brother, I didn't swallow the poison, I let it fall to the floor, where it belonged. I was terrified, yes. Terrified they would find out about the cafe, terrified they would try to crush this tiny, fragile version of me that was beginning to exist outside their grip. But beneath the fear was something stronger, a seed of freedom. I began to imagine a future not shaped by their demands. A room of my own, where silence was peace instead of punishment. A circle of people who chose me not for my usefulness but for my being. A life where love wasn't conditional, wasn't rationed like scraps. For the first time, I realized I had a choice. I could keep shrinking until nothing remained, or I could choose myself. The choice terrified me. But every night, as I counted the money in my envelope, I felt the truth settle deeper into my bones. Staying would kill me slowly. Leaving might hurt, might bleed, but it would also let me live. I didn't know yet when or how. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty: the day was coming when I would no longer belong to them. The day I left wasn't dramatic. No screaming match, no slammed doors. Just quiet, so quiet it almost felt ordinary. I had been preparing for months, moving pieces of my life like a secret game of chess. Clothes hidden in a friend's garage. Papers and documents tucked into the bottom of my school bag. The envelope of wages growing heavier beneath my mattress until it finally held enough for a deposit on a small room. That morning, my family sat around the table the way they always did. My brother laughed about some story from training, my mother corrected him with fond exasperation, My father muttered about bills. Their voices filled the room, weaving a life I was no longer part of. I stood there with my bag on my shoulder, waiting, hoping, absurdly, that someone would notice. That someone would look up and ask, "Where are you going?" That even at the last moment, I might matter enough to interrupt their rhythm. But no one did. So I opened the door. Stepped out. Closed it behind me. The air outside was sharp and alive, the sky wide in a way I had never seen from my bedroom window. My heart pounded with terror, but beneath it was something I hadn't felt in years, relief. For the first time, silence was mine. Not their punishment. Not their neglect. Mine. I walked down the street with my bag cutting into my shoulder and realized that I was free. Poor, uncertain, completely alone, but free. That night, in my new room, bare walls, secondhand sheets, a window that rattled when the wind blew, I lit a small candle and watched its flame flicker. It reminded me of that 18th birthday, the crooked candle and the cake no one ate. Only this time, the flame wasn't lonely. It was defiant. I whispered into the dim room, "This is mine. This life is mine." And though the fear didn't vanish, though my chest still ached with the years of wanting love that never came, I knew I had crossed a line I could never uncross. I would not return. Freedom wasn't easy. It never is. The first weeks in my new room were a blur of exhaustion. I worked double shifts at the cafe, came home to peeling paint and thin blankets, and counted coins before falling into bed. Some nights I cried, missing even the cold familiarity of home. Hunger had sharp teeth, and loneliness was louder than I'd ever imagined. But every morning, when sunlight slipped through the cracked blinds, I felt something steady in my chest, pride. This survival was mine. Every cup of coffee I served, every page of homework I finished in the quiet hours, every bill I managed to pay, it was all mine. No one could take that away. I enrolled in classes again. Not because anyone told me to, not to prove myself, but because I wanted to. I sat in lecture halls where no one knew my family name, and for the first time, my voice didn't tremble when I raised my hand. I was not the shadow there, I was a student, a mind, a presence. I made friends who saw me. They asked about my thoughts, not my usefulness. They laughed with me, not at me. And slowly, painfully, I began to believe that I was not invisible after all. It wasn't a straight path. Some nights, I still dreamt of the kitchen table, of my mother's dismissive shrug, my father's silence. The words "nothing special" haunted me like a bruise that never fully fades. But each time those memories rose, I met them with a new truth: I had walked away. I had chosen myself. One evening, after a long shift and a longer day of classes, I stood in front of the mirror. The girl staring back wasn't the ghost who had once folded herself into silence. Her shoulders were straighter. Her eyes, though tired, burned steady. "You are enough," I said aloud. The words were simple, but they rang through the room like a bell. You always were. For the first time, I didn't just say it. I believed it. I no longer needed their approval. I no longer needed to beg at a locked door. My worth had never belonged to them. It belonged to me, and it always had. And that knowledge was more than freedom, it was home.